Hey, everyone, and welcome back to Keep It in Perspective. It's me, Christian Hanley. And today I will be joined in a little while by a very esteemed guest. Excuse me. It's been a long day. This is going to be Professor and State Representative from Kansas, Barbara Ballard. Kansas, as you will remember, because it was only just last night, famously famously voted not to overturn a proposed ban on virtually all abortions in the entire state. It was an overwhelming margin of voters in Kansas that rejected that ridiculous and extremist proposal by a margin of 2-1. And so we'll have the professor and state rep on shortly to discuss that. But in the meantime, lots going on recently. What the absolute fuck, first off, is wrong with Republicans? I mean, seriously, this is the party that has, in just this week, fucked over or attempted to fuck over veterans, the people who they claim to adore more than anyone else, the people who they want to always have in their photos, in their social media posts, always want to invoke around 9/11, Veterans Day. They tried to fuck them over with the PAC Act and basically stall and lie to veterans and to voters, saying that there was some sort of procedural trick. There was the reason why they could not vote for healthcare benefits and other benefits for veterans who'd been exposed to toxic chemicals while serving. And this issue was really raised a lot by Jon Stewart, formerly of The Daily Show. He just did an amazing job, actually apologized for swearing on TV and on Facebook Live, which I will not ever do, but good for him. But I mean, he really used his celebrity in a way that it wasn't just about making an appearance or crashing a party. It was about actually using it to draw attention to a serious issue. And, you know, I caught segments the past couple of days of him cutting the wheel and pulling over the side of the Jersey Turnpike on the way home, just to make an appearance on a cable news show and spread the word and get the word out there to the public. Saw him holding press conferences, consoling veterans who were so frustrated and saddened that their government didn't listen to them. In particular, I shouldn't say their government. It was Republican senators who refused to listen, who would not just vote yes and get this done. Of course, the bill has since passed the Senate, but for the longest time, there was this, whatever it was, ultimately 6-week holdup because Republicans, Pat Toomey in particular, Ted Cruz as well, just fought to block it, saying that it was a stupid fucking procedural issue or a budget gimmick, as they called it. Basically, two line items or two areas in which spending can be broken down at the federal level: discretionary, where the money may or may not be budgeted year to year and spent, versus mandatory, where it becomes like clockwork and the money is already assigned in advance to a certain line item in the budget. And Republicans latched onto this, saying that Democrats had changed it and that therefore they could not vote for veterans, which is insane. I mean, that was never the issue. The problem was that Republicans were just fucking mad that they were, after being sort of this party of evil, maybe not geniuses, but evil tacticians led by Mitch McConnell in the Senate, got sort of outsmarted. That finally you had Chuck Schumer and Manchin get together and pass this bill that among other things fights climate change, provides money for making that green energy transition. And so what was their political move? To take it out on veterans of all segments of American society. So that's what we witnessed just now. And then last night, this was, it's Wednesday right now. So last night, seeing that in primaries across the country, Republicans are leaning into the Trump extremism, the big lie, leaning into election denialism. I mean, it was just not in any way extraordinary, not in any way surprising, but we did see that in places like Arizona in particular, seeing Republicans just going in on 2020, and some candidates, in fact, already pushing for the idea that that the current election, the one that's still being counted, that they were already dealing with election rigging. So there's fucking over veterans. There's lying about American democracy and threatening American democracy, and then of course we have the other massive issue that we'll spend the bulk of today talking about, which is these efforts in the states to further impede upon a woman's right to her own bodily autonomy. In Indiana, there's the effort in the state Senate to make abortion virtually completely illegal within state lines, ever since the story broke of a 10-year-old rape victim who had to be moved across state lines in order to get abortion care. And in the case of Kansas, the matter was brought to the voters. And so one thing I'm looking forward to discussing with our guest, Professor Ballard, coming up in a few minutes, is this idea that maybe nothing is the matter with Kansas, that in fact, like most of the country, people in that state were in line with the same way of thinking as most reasonable people, that, maybe there's a specific line or boundary around when abortions can be terminated, up to what point where that specific line is drawn. Those sort of details may need to be ironed out in a piece of legislation regulating abortion care. But at the end of the day, a ban on abortion, any law that is going to force a woman, or let's be really real about this, in a lot of instances, a child, a girl, carry a pregnancy to term, regardless of whether or not it might threaten their life, threaten their health, or maybe even be the result of sexual assault, or even forget the fact that it might not fit into either of those categories, that it might not, that a pregnancy might be something that is not okay for that person, that might not be able, for a whole host of reasons, to be able to carry to term, that sort of ban, that sort of imposition on another person's freedom is simply not okay, and it's unacceptable and un-American. And so anyway, I'm really looking forward to this conversation and what it could mean for the future of the GOP this fall in the midterms, and what they're sort of being out of step with the majority of Americans on so many issues that are deeply emotional and personal, what that means for our future, both in the short and long term. So stick around. I think this will be a great conversation. All right. Well, today I am joined by Barbara Ballard. Professor Ballard is a representative in the Kansas State Legislature, the 44th District, representing the people of Lawrence, Kansas. Representative Ballard, thank you for joining us today.
Well, it is my pleasure, Christian. Thank you so very much for inviting me.
Of course, and thank you for taking the time. I know you're currently traveling. You're in Denver. You are meeting people, doing a lot of things right now. So thank you for making the time. I wanted to get started talking about what's going on back home, though, in Kansas. Everyone around the country was watching Kansas last night, logging onto the New York Times, Washington Post, seeing what was happening. And for those who weren't checking in, the state had a referendum last night on a woman's right to an abortion within the state of Kansas. Can you tell us, just for sort of background here, for those of us who don't live there, how did that get started?
Well, the Kansas Supreme Court, I hope I have my year correct, but in 2019 ruled that a woman's right to an abortion was protected in the Kansas Constitution. And obviously, those of us that were in favor of it were very pleased. But then we had the opposites, people were not pleased at all about it. And if you want to change anything in the Constitution, you have to go before the people. And so it was the matter of the opposition to abortion coming up with an amendment to the Constitution, which is what we actually voted on for August the 2nd. And it really came as a result of how the Kansas Supreme Court ruled.
Interesting. So I didn't realize that anything that involves a constitutional amendment or change has to go directly before the people.
Yeah, it's not just a legislative process, because the Constitution is a lot more complicated, and you just can't change the Constitution.
Right.
It has to be done by the vote of the people.
Sounds like the old fashioned populism that the middle of the country used to be quite famous for back before Republican takeovers.
Yes, well, and actually, when you from my vantage point, I guess it's a good thing, because the majority in the legislature could almost do anything they wanted to do,
Yes.
without having the voice of the people put forth. And because if you're in the majority, then you rule all the time. So there's got to be something there that says, wait, at some point, you don't have a total power here. It has to go before. So I believe in putting together the Constitution. You make it very difficult for people to change the Constitution, because a Constitution is not to be changed at your whim, or because you didn't like it, or now it's outdated by your viewpoint. Part of a Constitution is supposed to be how the state is run, and that means it could sustain this for years and years and years and years.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially with a lot of states, I'm not sure to what extent this is true in Kansas, but a lot of state legislatures, certainly congressional delegations, the maps are really chosen. They're really drawn to insulate certain majorities. So if you have an unpopular majority that wants to push an unpopular opinion like this, perhaps taking it to the people really is the best solution.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it would. And I think people would take advantage of that, because if you don't have the numbers, you're going to always lose.
Right.
So at some point, what you're talking about affects not just the legislative body, it affects all of the people in the state of Kansas, and they should have a say-so.
Absolutely. And let's get into the numbers for a second. The last I checked, it was about a 2-1 margin when it came down to this one question about this right enshrined in the state constitution. What do you think that means for, or what does that tell us about where the people are at in Kansas, regardless of political affiliation?
Well, the vote on it was really called Value Them Both amendment. It was rejected by the population. It wasn't even a small margin. It actually lost by nearly 20%. And from walking door to door, talking to people, reading letters to the editor and everything else, there was a population of people felt that the opposite party had gone too far. That you were not making exceptions for race, for rape or for incest. And you were making it very difficult. And when we knew in the state, we had a 70% approval rate of a woman's right to choose. And nationwide, it was, a little bit more than that, percentage wise. And, if you think in terms of from almost 50 years, and yet it was being chipped away at in different states, and depending on your majority, then you were passing laws that was making it very difficult for abortion clinics to operate. And here it was this was law of the land, but there was a caveat when it was actually passed by the Supreme Court that said you would leave it up to states. So I think states just continued to do this and everything else, but almost 50 years, and they were never able to find justices that were willing to overturn it. And the nation felt differently about it than just overturn it. So if you had millions of people out there that were not willing to ban it and leave it as law, and ultimately they turned to the Supreme Court, and six justices did it. For a lot of people, they were outraged that you couldn't get millions almost in 50 years to do it, but yet you could find six individuals that happened to be justices that were supposed to be looking out for the welfare of the whole country. I think that had a huge impact on people just wanting to fight back because it had gone too far.
Yeah, certainly too far. And to your point about needing to find those justices, when you think about it, those are justices who were in large part appointed by presidents who were not elected by the people. They were elected by a mechanism that allowed them to take office and take power. And then once they were in power, appoint those justices. I mean, this is very much a coordinated effort as sort of a minority rule where they can impose that will on people. And so you're seeing this as kind of a backlash to that attempt.
Well, I think some of it was a backlash because, you know, when I'm talking with my conservative constituents,
mm-hmm.
and they say, you know, this has gone a little too far for me.
Yeah.
Then you really know. I'm not talking about my like-minded brothers and sisters out there. I mean, that's different. We agree. But then when you have people that normally do not agree with you,
right,
and then they'll say, you know, I this is just a little bit too much for me, Barbara. Or I would hear like my granddaughter says, now, Grandma, you're not going to vote for this, are you? You know what I mean?
right.
And all of that. And so it was, it was a backlash, but I think it went even beyond that because it was around and they were used to it. Most of the younger people all their lives, they didn't know any other way. You know, it was legal and you could have it. I think they knew that people were making it difficult for them, and there were demonstrations. We know in Kansas that the doctor that did it was actually murdered in church. We knew all of this in history, but it still was the law of the land. And now it was overturned. And what they're saying, here we have in Kansas an opportunity to vote and take it out of the Constitution. And I believe, especially among our younger voters, it was like, no, it's been around for 50 years. It is up to us now to keep it there. It is our right. It's our choice. And it's now up to us to keep what a whole population of people provided for us for over 50 years.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, that's certainly something that I would think a lot of young voters would be feeling. But I'm curious about those conservative constituents of yours. It seems like people within their own party have kind of shown their hand and they've overplayed it. Do you get the impression from those same people that they now kind of feel as though their opinions or their votes are up for grabs, that maybe that they feel that the party they have been traditionally aligned with might have just be going a bridge too far for them?
I think for some people, and then for others, their main goal is to ban abortion, and they're not allowing under most circumstances other than maybe the life of the mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they're so so bent on not having it that they're not thinking in terms of why people have abortions or the rights that other people have. It's almost as if it's what I want, and I'm not thinking about what other people want or what other people should have a right to. And I think it's just got it's just it's difficult to think of the right word for it, except I think it's wrong. It shouldn't happen. No one should do it, and I'm doing everything in my power to stop it. And then you have the other people on the side, but no, that's our right. You don't determine that for us. And I believe the vote that was taken yesterday, the people turned out and the people made it clear how they felt about taking away our choices and removing it from our Kansas Constitution.
And that's an important distinction too. It reminds me of a position that the current President Biden has talked about in the past, being an Irish Catholic, that whatever he feels like is right for himself is a matter of his own conscience, his own personal beliefs, but that doesn't give him the right to then seek office, to then impose that will, that personal belief on other people. But it seems as though for a lot of others in this anti-abortion, anti-choice, anti-bodily autonomy movement, whatever they subjectively feel, they are now willing to put above the rights of anyone and even change a state's constitution to do so.
Well, that's how it came across, and we had conversations about this. We said now, but they said that the feeling was the people should have an opportunity to weigh in on this. Mm-hmm. We said, well, if that is the case, why are we not voting on this in November? That's when most people vote.
Right.
No. We want it in for the primary. And we were saying, but fewer people vote in the primary. Well, no, we want it in the primary. Well, the fact that fewer people vote in the primary says that is not in keeping what you just said. You wanted the people in the state to weigh in. No, you wanted some of the people in the state to weigh in. And they insisted on it, and we had it in the primary, which normally you don't have that many people turn out to vote. Well, the people decided, you chose the month, you wanted it, we're turning out for it. We're going to do it. And we have a reason to do it. Now, it's not just the primary sometimes that may not be important, but for us, this is very important. You are taking away our rights. You're taking away our choice. And I think for many people, young people especially, we knew and we heard about it walking door to door. There were more first-time voters, 18-year-olds, turning out to vote. They had an investment and they wanted to have an impact on this decision.
That's impressive because that the conventional wisdom has been, I mean, not just in Kansas, but nationwide, that when it comes to voter turnout, primaries and especially in midterm years, that's the lowest you can get aside from off-year elections.
Absolutely. And we're talking about an important issue here. You're changing what's in your Constitution. And, that was not the case. But, a lot of it didn't make sense. The language was misleading. Mm-hmm. We didn't write that language. We were opposed to it. But the language was misleading. And, just last week, there was um, other, information that came out that was very misleading. And so we finally had to really get down to the basics of what this really was and what people had, because people were confused. If you saw how long it is, 2 large paragraphs.
Oh, wow.
Well, first of all, when you're sitting in line and you're going to vote, people in 8.5, point print, it was difficult to read all of that. And most people wasn't going to read it all then, and they tried to read it before. So we made it very simple. If you have been satisfied with language that was in the Constitution that protected a woman's right to an abortion, you vote no because you want to keep it the way it is. If you want to change the Constitution, then you vote yes because you want to change it. And people will say, well, why didn't they say that? And I said, you have to ask them that question. We're just telling you what it really means. No, if you want to leave it the way it is and you agree with the Supreme Court in the Kansas Supreme Court, you vote no. You want to make changes, you vote yes. Plain and simple.
So they not only decided to hold this referendum during a midterm primary in the summer, but then also had to make it intentionally confusing in small print and make it as confusing as possible. So
it was confusing. People would call my house and leave a message. Wow. Could you please, and not just my house, they were calling other legislators as well, or going to the Democratic Party, wanting to know, what does this really mean? How can I interpret what this means? And that's how confusing it was. And even though we knew what this amendment actually did, when you read it, it was not clear. And to me, that was intentional.
Mm-hmm.
That was intentional because a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to what's on a ballot anyway. And you try to tell them, what you're supposed to do and everything else. But something as important as this, which you chose to introduce this amendment for the people to vote on, then to deliberately have language that's confusing to them, it tells me that you really didn't want a lot of people to be voting on it, and that you were just trying to change it so that, no, it would not ban abortion. This only took it out of the Constitution. But when it took the language out of the Constitution, then it left the door wide open for you to pass any kind of legislation you wanted to, and you had no protection in your Constitution.
And for those of us who don't live within the state, what is roughly the breakdown? What is the breakdown of Republicans and Democrats in the legislature?
Oh, in the House, we have 125. We have 39 Democrats. So that's what, 86?
So it's an overwhelming supermajority. So if you have got something like this, that's a culture war issue that the GOP is out of step with the population on, had they succeeded last night in confusing people and keeping turnout down and keeping people from voting no, then they could have basically held a party line vote to ban abortion and get what they wanted.
Oh, well, absolutely, because I'll say the word was out there that if this amendment had passed, which way you say had passed, had been yes for them, they were going to call a special session of the legislature, and you need 2/3 of your members, of which they have 2/3.
Right.
And we were going to go back. They didn't say when, but they were going to call a special session. And there would be only one reason for us to be calling a special session. That special session would be called because they wanted to introduce some bills around abortion. Now, what has happened before when we've had bills around abortion, because we have had, Kathleen Sebelius, the Democratic governor, she would veto it. Governor Kelly would have vetoed it. Then they would have to have, to override it. And that meant that you need 42 on the Democrat side, or just 42 votes, it doesn't matter what side, to sustain the veto. Otherwise, you can override it. So with 39, if we couldn't find 3 votes, they would be able to get what they wanted. They could pass it, and then they could override the governor's veto. But the governor's veto has allowed our laws around abortion to not be as detrimental as they have been in some other states.
I mean, that's great for Kansas, but definitely scary for people living in other states where there isn't the same sort of small d democratic protections of individual rights and freedoms.
Absolutely. And actually, it's scary for us, too, because you may not always be able to sustain a veto, because you have to remember, even on the Democratic side, you have pro-life voters, too. So right. That means we're not guaranteed 39. We may pick up some moderate Republicans on that side, but you never know exactly what you're going, to have. But that's what's helped us to have, Democratic governor, and then the second Democratic governor, and you go through this process. But it was what you just called, over the years, chipping away, making it more difficult for people to get an abortion, and the harassing. And it just went on and on and on. And so, for you to get to what we had yesterday, I mean, the tension, oh my goodness. You didn't know who you were talking to, how they really stood about this. Were they going to get really violent about it? Were they going to take it out on your family members? You had no idea. But one thing we did know, we were going to go down fighting, and that we were going to protect our rights, and we were going to protect choice, and that a woman has a right to make choices for her own body. And there shouldn't be anyone else out there because they differ with it and all. It is law. We weren't doing anything that was not legal. And that was difficult, I think, for those that were so vehemently opposed to it. But just because you are opposed to it does not mean that you can control the life of another person. And that's what I think our vote said in Kansas, in no uncertain terms. No, no, and no.
I mean, it's impressive that you kept up the fight in light of the hostility you faced. There's one thing that you said just now that is making me think about some reports that I heard last night while this was still ongoing, while the votes were still being counted. And what you mentioned just a moment ago about the fact that there was this seemingly deliberate attempt to confuse and to reduce turnout. Did you pick up any sort of attempts at disinformation or misinformation as this campaign was rolling out? Attempts to more than just confuse people with the language of the proposition, but trying to just misinform or confuse people on social media or canvassing or mailers or things of that nature.
Oh yes. It was in the language. It made it sound as if there were just abortions all the time. And yet we had if you go back and you look in time, more abortions in 1990s and the early 2000s than we actually have today.
Right.
But if you listened to what they had to say, you would not think so. You would not know there were less. And then you would have comments like, and no federal dollars will be spent for abortions. Oh, wait, come on. Let's back up a little bit here. With abortions, the only money that would have been spent, that would have been federal, would have been for extreme cases that either required a serious illness that happened or death or something. And it was like a minimum of money that was even spent. And it was under scrutiny and under special circumstances. So that was misleading from that view, from that standpoint. If it was convenient, they sort of used it, and it wasn't an accurate picture. I'm drawing a blank on something else I wanted to tell you about it, but it was sort of like, oh yeah, we won't be spending our money on that. Well, first of all, you only spend it under rare circumstances. But for people who don't follow everything, they believe what they hear. And they would think you're telling, the truth, about that. So it was just so many, I can't even think of the little things that occurred, but mostly it was misleading about money being spent from the federal government, and you just realize that all of those things were not, or how many abortions were occurring, none of that was really telling the truth. It really wasn't. Yes, maybe some money was spent, but it was minimal under rare circumstances, but you never really said that along those lines. And it's like they almost became very desperate to do it. Well, if you're using misleading language, if you're going to put it on a primary, it's like, that's what we want. Well, you got Roe versus Wade overturned.
Mm-hmm.
And, but that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough.
Well, no, I mean, there seems to be an effort in the states now to, there is an effort in the states now, as soon as that ruling was handed down from the Supreme Court, to go state by state now and make these abortion bans or proposed abortion bans total and complete, and leave no wiggle room, leave no exceptions. And it sounds like Kansas, fortunately, survived one of those attempts just now.
We did. We survived it. And, I'm extremely, I would have to say, thankful to my state for realizing how important language in a constitution is, and should not just be taken out frivolously. And that was one. The other was they turned out. You wanted to hear from us? We will turn out. We made a statement. We knew that the country was looking at Kansas. I mean, we heard it, we saw it on TV all the time. These are the 5 states that are going to be having primaries, elections, as well as, an abortion amendment. So when you looked at all of that, you realize that it was a big burden on our shoulders yesterday. Because the country was watching us, and they kept saying it's the first state since the overturn of Roe versus Wade. And I think we in Kansas took it very personal that we maybe had more more responsibility than maybe we should have had to assume, because people were looking to us. And if this could happen to us, it can happen to other states. And I'm hoping that we gave other states hope. We gave them courage, and we gave them the will to fight, and not let people tell you what you have. We are citizens of the United States, and we have our rights, and we were protecting them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm wondering, as someone who sits in a state legislature with such an overwhelming Republican majority, this latest effort is just another demonstration of the party sort of drifting away from the mainstream, drifting away from, though we have a widely diverse population, though we're a very large country, there's still sort of a center of public opinion, and the GOP keeps drifting farther and farther away from it. This is one example. Another famous one is opposing any sort of reasonable restrictions on guns, on having things like universal background checks that nearly everybody agrees with. Are you starting to see now, are you hoping to see in the near future, some sort of wiggle room there with Republicans in the legislature, even Republican voters who might say, hey, I've been part of this party for X number of years, but this is a bridge too far. Maybe I can consider voting with the Democrats sometimes. Maybe there's some room to kind of reach across the aisle. This is not as extreme as I would like to go. Are you picking up on that now?
Well, I would hope so. And, we're not as polarized as, say, Washington, D.C.
Right.
But we still have polarization. On some issues, we do vote bipartisan. Mm-hmm. And for that, I'm thankful that we're able to do that. But issues around guns, it's like we don't have wiggle room at all. It's Second Amendment. Even with the shootings in Uvalde or Sandy Hook, or just shootings, mass shootings in different places, whether it was Buffalo or wherever it was, the media talks about it for days, weeks, and then you don't hear anything else about it.
Right.
It just sort of, it's like, okay, what's next? Well, I believe we're getting to the point now that people are saying, wait a minute. No one should have mass shootings, whether it's the one in Las Vegas, or why should we have AR-15s? Why do we need all of that to protect ourselves? Why do we have to have mags? Why would you choose to sell an 18-year-old 2 AR-15s and 400 rounds? Is that necessary? People are beginning to question, is all of this necessary? Yes, you have a right to protect your family. Yes, you can own a gun. We don't have any objection to people owning guns. I mean, their Democrats own guns too.
Yeah, right. Right.
That's not the issue. The issue is, why do we need an AR-15? That's not what you need to protect yourself. But it's like, you don't touch my guns. If you say one word about it, you're opposed to guns. Personally, I am not opposed to guns. My father had hunting guns and he had a handgun. So all of us knew it, but we also knew we were not to touch it. And it was not a toy.
Right.
So, it just becomes those issues that, to me, I read it someplace and I saw it on TV, so it's not my original. But it says, moms are going to have to get really mad about, somebody coming into their children's school and everything and killing up their children. They're going to have to get mad. Dads are going to have to get mad. Grandparents are going to have to get mad. And just the common person on the street's going to have to say, no, this is going to have to stop. Protection you need, but not like this. Not like this. And I think the GOP is like pushing it. They're a little bit too far. They're just pushing it too much and pushing it. And to me, that's taking away people's rights too. You're scared to send your own children to school. You're not sure you want to be out there because you don't know what's going to happen. Reasonable. Be reasonable about it. Use common sense. And to me, there's no common sense about it. It's like, this is what we want. This is what it is. And it's the extreme. And we're just, it's not just that, but how do you think January 6th came about? And people are saying, get over it. How do you get over it? How do you get over a group of people wanting to overthrow the democracy of the United States? How do you get over that? Everybody should be outraged and not defending the people who did it or the lies that followed. It's like we have a lot to get back to in terms of why we are a great country, why we love our country. And no one should be allowed to destroy our country. And if you notice, I said our country. It's not just my country. This is our country.
Right.
And I think in many, and if another state should have a vote like we had yesterday, we will be watching them just like they were watching us, because we're protecting the constituents in the state of Kansas. But more importantly, the people in Kansas yesterday stepped up to the plate and protected themselves and let the opposition know that we will defend what we think are our rights.
And did an excellent job of it. I mean, there were people all around the country watching all night long, refreshing their web browsers, scrolling on their phones,
yes.
checking for the latest. I'm wondering though, as someone who, part of their job is being in the legislature and bargaining with people across the aisle.
Yes.
Are you sensing anyone finally kind of waking up? You talked about at length about this absolutism with the Second Amendment. Of course, it doesn't say anything about AR-15s. It simply uses the word arms. But we all know that if you try to buy a nuclear weapon on the dark web, or you try to bring a bomb into a public area, you would be taken out. Those are arms too, but there's never any
No.
question about that. But
No.
but somehow, if the arm in question has a barrel to it, then any other capacity it has, it doesn't matter. As long as it has a barrel, it's off limits. But like with this issue of abortion, of the right wing, the extreme right going too far, are you seeing any glimmer of hope there on this gun issue with members of the GOP?
The minute you talk about guns, they become defensive.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just defensive the minute you start talking about guns. And the NRA lobbyists will be down on those people in a heartbeat. So it's really difficult about it because, but as I said, it's not like anyone wants their guns.
Right.
We just want reasonable gun control. And even with the killings, that has not, I haven't seen any significant difference. Even with the killing of 19 kids and 2 teachers. I'm sure there's some of the people I know in the legislature have felt sorrow,
Mm-hmm.
have felt empathy for the parents. You know, I would like to think they have, but they haven't expressed it. They haven't come out against um, stricter gun laws. And I think that is because it may cost them their election. It may uh, cause them to have opponents running against them. And then maybe there's some of them that feel so strongly about their guns that they really don't care. But I don't know. I don't know why they haven't made a move other than maybe they have their own personal fear of rebuttal or backlash from their colleagues. I don't know. But I know a lot of these legislators, and I know some of them are feeling for these parents and families of these children. I know they are. But I haven't seen any real evidence of it.
So the political courage then is still lacking. The humanity is there, but the political courage might still be lacking.
I think so. I think so. And I don't sit in judgment of them. I make sure that if I'm speaking, I refer to how I feel about this issue and not pass judgment, because I don't know under what constraints they have,
Right.
I don't know that. I just know that I know many of them, and they have to have some heavy feelings for the families where it happens to their children.
Right.
But I was taught that if you see an injustice and you see that you have to speak up, and it may be uncomfortable and unpopular for you to do so, but it's something you have to do. You can't watch awful things happen to people. You can't watch someone being discriminated against. You have to take a stance. And that means that maybe it puts you in a very uncomfortable position, but you have to do it.
Right.
And I think because I was raised that way, it says that I am not one to just sit and watch and say how terrible it is, but not try to do anything about it. And there's a lot of people I know like me that believe that we can make a difference, that we have to have the courage to do it. And in many ways, it's our obligation to speak up for those that cannot speak up on behalf of themselves. And that's how I live. I don't know how other people live, but that's how I lived. That's how we were in our family. That's how my husband and I have raised our son. And we're not in this world by ourselves, and we have to take care of each other.
Well, I certainly hope that when it comes to matters like gun control, we do start taking care of each other. Gun control, healthcare, there's a lot of areas where we are really as Americans not working together constructively right now. That's for sure.
No, because right now we are the only country that has this many shootings and killings. not other countries are not experiencing this to the same degree that we are.
Right.
And that doesn't make sense to me. How can other people live without all these massive shootings? You know, there are places that even their police don't carry guns.
Right. They don't have to.
And they don't have to. And
Right.
now a policeman would not set foot out of their patrol station or out of their car without having a gun.
Right.
Because actually we'll challenge the police, you know, the law enforcement person. You know, and so I don't know how we're going to get ourselves back to more self-control and caring enough that people will speak up and say, you know, we have got to go back to being more caring about each other. And it sounds so cliche in a way.
Right. Right.
But if we're not, that's why we continue to shoot and harm people and not care about people or put what we want above other people's rights. You know, and today we were talking about it, and I would say we won, we prevailed, but they will come up with something else. They'll come up with laws that will make it difficult for us to operate in the state of Kansas. And they'll have the numbers, and we'll have to find other ways to protect the rights of our constituents. But we'll be prepared to do it because we know that they lost this one, but they'll get together and decide again what else can they do and how can they make an abortion difficult. How can they tell misleading stories to keep people on the edge, to have them believe things that are not true, things that are not happening in this state, because these other people will never go and check them and they'll just believe them. And we'll have to go out and try to tell the truth. And we'll prepared. We will be prepared to do that. That's how we have to live.
Well, I'm sorry that that's necessary, but I'm very happy to hear that you all are prepared and clear-eyed about what needs to be done and about the need to be vigilant.
Oh yeah, we're celebrating and we're thankful.
Yeah,
and we give, and we're just so proud of our state. But we know that this is just one of the fights, and I'm sure going down the way they did last night, they're not happy about it. Right. But we wouldn't have been happy had we gone down on the other end either. But I think for them, it's like they lost, but they're going to blame someone. Right. That we heard they talk about, well, a lot of dark money came in, or it was misleading. And I smiled and said, yeah, it was misleading, but I'm not sure it was on our side.
Right. Right.
But you just sort of know that this is going to happen. And, you know, to me, you take one fight at a time. And this was a huge fight.
Yeah.
And the people spoke. That's what they wanted to hear. They wanted the people to speak. They just didn't hear the language they wanted to hear.
Exactly. They wanted their own people to speak, right? Just not the people.
That's it. They wanted, and you know, and I think it took a lot of courage, because you know, in a lot of small places, it's not always easy for your vote to be secret.
True. Yeah.
And we knew some people were worried about that too, because you're small enough and they know who voted, who didn't vote it, and and all of that. And I don't know how those people ultimately voted, but there was enough people that realized this was huge. And as I said before, they knew the country was watching. And, Kansas has a very rich history of women voting before women had the right to vote, women holding office before they could do that. And we don't buckle easily. And I think we are a proud people, and we fight for what we believe in. And when we think people have gone too far, or when they're taking advantage of people, and when they don't seem to care about our rights as a citizen of the United States and of the state of Kansas, then it's time to put a halt to it. And that's what we did, and we will be prepared to do it again, because it is the right thing to do. And because we have our rights and they don't come freely, we have to fight for them. And we have to protect them. And that's what we did.
Well, Barbara Ballard, Democratic representative from Lawrence, Kansas, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. It was really just such a pleasure. And thank you for all the great work that you're doing in Kansas.
Well, this meant a lot to me today, because I hope I articulated what I feel the people of Kansas really did, and how everybody assumed a responsibility, and how everybody was willing to get out there and try and make a difference. And it didn't matter how small it was or how big it was. When you put it all together, it all came out to, we did it. We did it. We did it.
Hey there, and thank you for listening to Keep It in Perspective. This is Christian Hanley. If you got a moment, please go to letskeepitinperspective.com. That's letskeepitinperspective.com, and make sure you sign up there and get added to our mailing list. I promise you'll not get bombarded, because frankly, no one's got time to email you all that stuff. And I know you've got no time to read it all. Promise it'll be rare and only the good stuff, but would really appreciate it. And of course, if you like this episode or any other episode, go ahead and share it on Facebook, Twitter, or wherever you spend time on social media. And thanks again for listening.